Thank you. Maybe it was because of Nelson Mandela's passing, but in our own country we had change and evolution. So the first two pieces about something that happened in the 1950s.
Melanie?
Yes.
Get a little bit closer to the mic.
Okay.
I think.
Passing by.
That better, Bob?
Is that better, Bob?
She's pulled the mic over toward her.
Okay, that way? Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. Passing by. Mississippi was a strange place to the 2.5-year-old white girl. Its smells and sound were unlike anything she had seen, but she loved the fluffy, thick biscuits oozing with rich yellow butter, for her mother was a poor cook. Her mother, highly agitated at the Mississippi Southern in-laws with no indoor plumbing, was desperate to escape, if only for a day. The little girl listened to her mama's lamenting until it lulled her asleep in the car. They had driven across the state line to Memphis, entering a world of paved roads and buildings with sidewalks and a movie palace. This her mother could understand. She had carted the child along, not because she was particularly fond of her, but because she did not want to be criticized for being a rude New York Yankee. The little girl practically trotted beside her open-toed, high-heeled mama as they walked the aisle of the theater. There was a thick rope strung across a section with people of color behind it. The child reached up with her free hand, but was yanked forward by her mother. Obviously irritated, the mother held her head high and strode proudly, gripping the girl by her chubby little hand. The child looked over her shoulder at the large brown faces somberly watching them. The mother plopped the girl in the seat and hissed at her to be good. Then she sat and breathed in the coolness of the theater, looking forward to when the lights would go out and she could relax. Engrossed in the dramatic movie, The Robe, the mother watched as the Roman leader told the two main characters to deny Christ or be put to death. Suddenly, the little girl, all but forgotten by her mother, jumped up out of her seat and yelled at the big screen, "No, don't do it." The mother's shock turned to anger as she heard chuckles, and she grabbed the child and forced her into the theater seat. When the lights came up, the mama's cheeks were red from embarrassment, dragged the child out of the theater knowing they had to leave first. Frightened because she had made mama angry again, the child saw the brown faces smiling at her this time and felt confused. The mother never saw the lady with the chocolate drop eyes holding her hand out under the rope. The child, seeing the warm chocolate brown eyes, brushed her chubby fingers across the open palm, and by that touch she knew that somehow it was all right and she was not a bad girl. She grew up remembering the South as fluffy, thick biscuits oozing with rich yellow butter and ladies with chocolate drop eyes. Passin' at Pickin'. Now, it had been a little while the child had come back. It had been 2 years, so they were headed south again to visit Daddy's family. Daddy drove the large, round-fendered black sedan with a fury, for Mississippi could not wait. Mama, wanting to stop and he wanting to drive straight through, caused an argument that lasted from New York to Mississippi. When they arrived, the little girl, now 4, was allowed to take her shoes off and wiggle her toes in soft, warm dirt. She did not remember anyone, but her parents explained to her that the approaching large man was her grandpa on Daddy's side, and she was to call him Pawpaw. He lumbered towards her, and she felt his affection by his large grin, and he gently patted her on the head. He was bigger than a tree, and when she looked straight at him, all she saw was worn overalled kneecaps. He took her in the truck to show her off so she could be clucked over with soft endearments that she had yet become accustomed to, but definitely enjoyed. The first time they had asked her to give them some sugar, she said she had left the sugar bowl at home. Amused, they taught her that a kiss was sweet, and that would be her sugar. Enthralled at the field of white, her pawpaw took her to a large place to play pickin'. Dragging the canvas sack to a row, amusing her elders, she started carefully picking the cotton, realizing that what looked soft really had a harsh, prickly-type feeling and wasn't even pure white. The novelty of pickin' wore off quickly in the hot sun, and her hair was soon sweaty. That is when she saw the big girl glance at her across the row. She knew she was old. Yes, she must be at least 8, like her cousin in New York. She smiled smiled, but the older cocoa-colored girl only stared. The friendly 4-year-old said, "I'm tired of playing pickin'. Let's go play something else." The taller, thin girl stared at her as if she were crazy. Suddenly, loud, thudding footsteps came, and 2 hands grabbed the little white girl and carried her back to the porch, gently sitting her down. "Here's sugar, here's some lemonade." The 4-year-old watched the tall girl be tugged at by a dark grown-up, and watching, she knew suddenly that the girl in the field was not playing at pickin'. She started to cry and heard the grown-ups around her. "What on earth? Oh, she just needs a nap. Now you just take her back on home." Paw carried her while she watched the brown-skinned girl pickin', who never looked up. As January approaches, we will be celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King, so I'll be probably reading that or in a AACP breakfast that we'll be having up in Marshall. This poem is a little romantic in memory of my husband. The last. I do not desire to be kissed since he left. For should I forsake my lover's soul in the beauty of truth untold? Nay, the kiss that was meant to be shall stay for eternity, for it is ever present, its silken fill still resident upon my lips of memory. One of the things I do in ministry is I study the scriptures a lot, and really delving into John chapter 10, when I saw the Feast of Dedication, I was in awe. I was like, my goodness, I can have a Hanukkah. So my Hanukkah lights are up, and I've written 2 poems regarding some spirituality, but I'm just going to read one called The Journey. Journey. The saint with the past, the sinner with the future. Is not the past in front, for I see where I have been? Is not the future behind, for I see not where I will go? Tread carefully high upon this path, knowing nothing but him. And sometimes we need to get lighthearted, especially with electronic technology. The beast. They said I cannot break it, yet it freezes, unblinking, and dies. If I could not break it, why can they not fix it? The oxymorons of computerize. Humming, computer bites, grit imaginary teeth, and crash. This word does not appease me. Why, no answer, I do not know. And in life, there's always challenges, be they children we went to school with or situations. And this actually was inspired by a boy I went to school with, whose name was Frank. Frank Quick. The smile on his face was more of a smirk as he stood before his peers, glanced at his paper, folded it, and standing straighter, gave his recitation in a lyrical tone. Ice cream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. The class broke up laughing as their teacher, Miss Heller, slapped the top of her desk with the flat palm of her hand. She rose with lips pressed so tightly together the edges of her mouth seemed to turn white. So this was how her new pupil was starting 4th grade initiation. She took a deep breath before speaking. Frank ignored it while taking a bow amidst the laughter and applause. Now he had a surefire in with the class, even if he was the new kid. Francis Sampson Quick, have a seat, said Miss Heller. This is hardly acceptable behavior. I emailed your mother last night with the assignment so you could be part of the class on your first day. I assure you she will hear of this. Now sit down. Eyes narrowing, he stared hard at her, receiving the order as the revelation of his name trickled through the other students' minds. Oh, he glared, and then he stated in that file he knew it was in there. It had to be. Francis, never call him Francis. The name is Frank. Samson he could even handle, but he hated Francis. Mrs. Heller continued, unaware that she had just declared war. If you think that's an acceptable poem, you're mistaken, she said. You're to write a paper on poetry tonight and read it before the class tomorrow. The serious facial expression Frank wore was an unreadable mask. He smiled. Yes, mein Lieder, teacher, he said in a clipped voice as he snapped his heel together. Again, his actions brought forth peals of laughter. Sit down now, snapped Miss Heller. He bowed graciously before walking to the back of the room, occupying the last empty seat. The class hadn't had such pleasure since last year in third grade when the cherry bomb had gone off in the boys' toilet. They had been sent home for a possible terrorist attack, and the whole third grade class was given detention. And they all knew who the terrorist was, but no one turned him in. Yet sadly, during the summer, his parents transferred him to a private school. Now Frank had given them hope that the fourth grade was going to be more interesting than the third grade. Miss Heller started to read Casey at the Bat when sounds emanated from the back of the room that sounded like an announcer whining, "Strike!" She quickly looked up and glared at Frank. Feigning innocence, he looked surprised. Regaining her composure, she started over, only to have the sound of a bat cracking and then a whistle interrupting her reading. "Francis Sampson, quick, you come up here right now and sit in the front row. Henry, you sit in the back." Henry looked a little confused, as if he might be in trouble. Frank slapped Henry on the back and spoke to him as if they were buddies. "Hey, sorry about this, Hank. Name's Frank." Shaking the former Henry's hand and then giving him the new greeting of fists hitting, making the newly christened Hank grin, Frank turned around and told the class, "Hey, let's all hear it for Hank, a real player." The class applauded, cheered, and hooted. Hank, laughing, felt something had come over him, something new, as he headed to the back of the room. So he put his arms up in victory, and he cheered along with the group. Miss Heller was furious. "Henry, sit," said Miss Heller. Her voice was angry, but controlled. It was the first time Henry had ever felt like he really belonged. He liked Frank, and better yet, he liked the name Hank. Taking the seat in the back, he politely raised his hand. Miss Heller, exasperated, closed her eyes for a moment, opened them, and then in a neutral tone said, "What?" "Miss Heller, please call me Hank from now on. Thanks," said Hank, a.k.a. Henry. Momentarily flustered, Miss Heller did not respond. She just gave a non-committal nod and focused on Frank, a.k.a. Francis Sampson Quick. She stood in front of Frank and started to recite Casey at the Bat again when another low cheer came from the class. Busy concentrating on Frank, her head shot up as she glared at the class. "One more rude outburst," whispered, "hiss or sound as I read this, and you will all be doing a paper on poetry. Understood?" The class sombered and politely listened until Miss Heller finished and Frank generated the applause. The class clapped a full 5 minutes. Frank timed it perfectly to the lunch bell. Then the bell rang, and they all raced out the door so quickly that Miss Heller had to take a safe position behind her desk. Frank paused in front of her desk and gave her a charming smile. "Miss Heller, I prefer to be called Frank. Enjoy your lunch. See you tomorrow." Miss Heller sat staring after him as he left the room. He didn't walk like the other students. He sauntered out of the class. And then, before disappearing into the mayhem in the hall, he turned around and winked at her. The next day, Miss Heller braced herself for fourth grade language arts class and Francis Sampson Quick. This last piece is called Innocence. And this is going to be with a little southern accent because this is from Sweetwater, Tennessee. Folks loved their little town of Sweetwater. So everybody was always in awe of little Candy Tucker. Now, Candy Tucker had grown up to be quite well endowed. She sashayed in to the Tennessee Sweetwater 5 and dime store, and she could cause more than just door chimes to go off. The clicking sound of her open-toed mules against the wax linoleum floor always drew attention. Candy had her own innate style, and her weekly legendary shopping excursions couldn't help but set off a few wagging tongues. Candy's unique fashion sense and the accentuating of her well-endowed hourglass figure fascinated everyone. Today she wore a low-cut, sleeveless black V-neck shell and skin-tight leopard pattern pedal pushers, topped off by a tight gold metal belt clasped around her tiny waist. The little bells hanging from her belt jangled softly as she continued down the aisle. Now, this particular ensemble, coupled with her natural Marilyn Monroe walk, once literally stopped traffic. Her high-pitched giggle accompanied her story when she told her mama and the other ladies at the beauty parlor all about the new deputy being real friendly-like, and he had stopped all 4 streets of traffic to let her cross for the Columbus Day sale. It was understandable to the townsfolk that Candy's mama had grayed early. The result being that Candy became an expert in hair color. Now, Candy's hair color of the month was a flaming orange red. She had teased and piled her long hair high on her head, its brilliance nonetheless dazzling against her fair complexion. The purple eyeshadow and false eyelashes she applied made her deep olive green eyes appear larger as she oohed and awed over every new piece of merchandise. Delighted, she giggled at new passion plum lipstick. Movie magazines, being Candy's only reading material, caused her to always know what was the latest rage. Ever gracious, she shared her fashion knowledge. She gleaned over those movie rags and would let anybody know within hearing distance, explaining what was in and out of style. Baffled folks wondered out loud how she acquired some of her wardrobe. Little did they know about the whirring of the household sewing machine into long hours of the night. It was Candy's opinion, and most of the locals come to think of it, that she would have made it in Hollywood if she'd been able to study acting. It was common knowledge that she had promised her daddy on his deathbed to stay home and work in the beauty parlor with her mama. An unconscious magnet, Candy smiled benevolently, radiating her warmth equally to everyone, never discerning the electric undercurrent she generated. A newcomer, a little 4-year-old rural girl, looked at Candy admiringly from behind a rack of clothes. "Hey," whispered the child, peeking out from behind a red and white checkered apron. "Well, hey, sugar," said Candy, drawing the child to her with a welcoming smile as she held out a stick of gum. The little girl, having never seen anyone so vibrant before, experienced a new boldness. Pushing her blonde ringlets off her forehead, she solemnly walked toward Candy, slowly reaching out for the gum, and she quickly drew closer and patted the leopard print pants. "You're a little beauty," whispered Candy, chuckling the child under the chin. The pretty little girl smiled up at her shyly. "Girl, come here," admonished her tired mother before giving Candy a curt nod with her head. "You go to your mama, Cookie," said Candy sweetly. Now see, that was Candy. She was able to encourage a child to obedience, unaware of the good she had on folks. Her very presence had a ripple effect upon the good folks of the town by reminding them of their manners and true purpose in life. In fact, just today, her dazzling appearance could be felt by the local populace. Ray, the store owner of the Five and Dime, had abruptly dropped a bolt of gingham when Candy entered the store. Ray not only apologized profusely to his elderly customer, but after getting a look from his wife, Irma, he decided to surprise Irma and take her out to the local diner for dinner. Now, Irma considered getting her hair dyed, and maybe she would buy some of that lipstick herself. The only minister in town, Reverend Cameron, he paid for his purchase while reminding himself to check on that order of choir robes. His faith was stirred to new heights as he prayed fervently that the robes would arrive before Candy sang her church solo. He also decided tomorrow's sermon would be on Christ's teaching that as a man thinketh he is. The little rural girl, now at her mother's side, tugged at her mama's blue muslin skirt, and pointing to the 2 goldfish suspended in Candy's clear plastic heel, she whispered, "Oh, Mama, isn't she beautiful?" Her mama gave Candy a second cursory glance. "She looks like trash," she muttered. Watching Candy wiggle to the checkout, the little girl sighed. "That's what I want to look like when I grow up. I'm going to be trash," whispered little Dolly.